Hello, and welcome back to this fourth beta edition of the Dev Game Club. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined again this week by a man who can cook 10-minute rice in 9.5 minutes.
Tim Longo.
Hey, Tim, how you doing?
Good.
What are we going to do this week? This should be our last week with System Shock 2. Am I right?
Yes, we have hit our fourth episode, as you said, of the beta, which is awesome. And thus we have finished playing System Shock 2. And a lot to compare, I'm sure, about the end of the game. And so our first segment will definitely just cover finishing the game, the playthrough itself, and what we did, how we kind of ended things. And then the second big segment will be sort of a summary of our full, the full series for the game, and what our big takeaways are going to be. What things we really learned, what things we steal, things like that, to kind of sum it all up. So, kind of two big chunks for this final episode.
Right. So we should probably start right off getting into the thing that you wanted to talk about last time, and which is really interesting to me, is you talked about having sort of various psi combos, which were basically your way of using all these different powers at your command, which are there are a lot more than I had remembered since I've been playing a psi second playthrough on Twitch and stuff. There are a lot of different powers for psionics. How have you been stringing that stuff together?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I would say, to your point about the number of them, I would say there's probably too many to really take advantage of. I actually ended up, because I focused so much on psi, I ended up getting most of the ones that are available in all 5 tiers. Not every single one, but a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And I just found myself sticking to fewer than I actually needed. I had way more than I ever used. So it's interesting. It was great that they gave the flexibility, but for me, I really wanted to, force myself to focus, which I don't. I usually focus on a spec when I play other games, but I generally don't. I think I mentioned this in the first episode or something, that I generally don't go toward magic user types. It's not really my bag. And right. So it was a big challenge for me. So what I thought was interesting that came into really in this last session came into the forefront for me more than the other sessions is, for me, the psi stuff ended up kind of being like a puzzle game in a lot of ways. Each encounter became very puzzly for me because I really had to manage my resources. I had to have perfect playthroughs of specific encounters and moments, especially the more difficult ones. And then ultimately I got over a hump that I'll talk about toward the end, which I've found to be the case in other RPGs where I'm playing as a magic user, which is rare, but when I do, it seems like kind of the norm that basically by the end you become overpowered. And I thought, as you and I had talked about before, I figured the end was going to be really, really rough for me because I was so psi focused, and it ended up being the opposite.
And that's interesting because that is exactly the opposite of my experience.
How crazy! Yeah, you were saying
I did not expect that at all.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I found the end of the game very difficult, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But one of the things about the psionics and having all that variety of powers is I think the real issue there is you're basically drawing on one resource to power it. Whereas with me, I'm carrying around 6, 7, whatever weapons with a billion different ammo types, and I can't just choose whichever one I want to use because I have to constantly be thinking about, I want to switch to this gun because I've got anti-personnel rounds in that gun, and I have to manage that stuff a lot more closely. So by the end of the game, I was starting to get a little bit resource starved just in ammo. There was enough, but I was, and luckily I'd held back in particular a lot for my grenade launcher and the fusion cannon, which were two very powerful weapons. But even with those, I found in the final encounter I was having to save every time I had kind of completed one step of basically what became a puzzle for me that had to be perfectly played through like you described. So it kind of flipped the script on me. Not something I was expecting.
No, I'm actually surprised too. I'm very surprised at how it ended up for me too, kind of on the opposite. I mean, don't get me wrong. I definitely did a lot of saving and a lot of step by steps. But there are certain things, certain kind of again, getting back to the combos. To give an example, for the ninjas, and we forgot to hit it last time, but the red ninjas, which were critical path, usually I would just kind of skip the ninjas. But the combo that I ended up figuring out is I would use hypnosis, which basically stuns or charms um, biological, entities or cyborgs.
Right.
And then I would hit my adrenaline, which gives me a boost to my hand to hand. And then I would just walk up behind the stunned ninja, and I was
on it
doing
with the
so much.
wrench.
Yeah, 2 hits basically, 2 wrench hits, and he's down. So they basically couldn't do. There's occasionally they would escape and run backwards because they always were trying to stay away from you. That was their kind of tactic, range combat.
Right.
But usually I got both hits off before they would move, and so that's how I ended up. That was kind of a specific combo that I ended up using. I'd usually put my strength mod on as well,
implant.
so I get implant to get a little extra damage on there. But so that was when I needed to take ninjas out. That's how I would do the combo. But many more combos I'll talk about.
I mean, they took me 3 shots with the EMP rifle, I think, which was my high-end energy weapon, that I had to put in 50 points for or whatever so I could use it. And it still took 3 shots. Although granted, I didn't have to get near them, right? I could take them out from range,
right?
And things like that. Of course, that was a useful weapon to have across all kinds of things. But I didn't discover for a long time that I could actually use that against them. I figured they were biological, but of course they're cyborg ninjas, so I guess they've got some metal in there, and the EMP stuff worked really well on them, which was surprising.
Yeah, that combo for me ended up. I mean, I don't know how expensive the ammo is for that thing. Oh, I guess you recharge it, right, for the EMP rifle. But I mean, as far as like efficiency of psi use,
points or whatever.
Points, yeah. The actual economy of that, it's pretty efficient for me. The hypnosis is not very expensive, and the adrenaline's not very expensive. And then, of course, the hits are free because I'm using my wrench. So
right.
I focused on the wrench a lot, and I ended up upping my strength a lot because it was an unlimited resource, and I was generally so resource starved.
Right.
But, that was always my backup.
Right, and I found myself going to the wrench pretty often, against, the zombies, even the midwives on occasion. If I kind of rounded a corner on one, not if they were off at a distance the whole time, it was just too difficult to evade their ranged attacks. But yeah, I mean, I tried to use it a lot. The one thing that I didn't use it much on was like the spiders, because they're just a pain to hit because they're on the ground. The little ones in particular. I guess the bigger ones I could probably hit more often. But yeah, well, so that's interesting. We should probably kind of get into the sort of different types of difficulty that come about as we get to the end of the game, which were kind of all over the place. There were more things than I remembered. Certainly, I remembered that final room inside the body of the many, but other than that, most of the ending of the game was pretty unfamiliar to me.
Yeah,
and
me too.
It was very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, the Rickenbacker had definitely caught me by surprise. I was like, okay, I'm almost done with the Von Braun. And I'll talk about it. Maybe I can talk about the shuttle section of the Von Braun getting to the umbilical to the Rickenbacker. Yeah, sure. That was actually the hardest part of the whole game for me because of my resource situation at the time. But but the Rickenbacker itself was way more elaborate than I remembered it being. Like I thought we were close to the end at that point, and you and I had texted, and you were like, "Oh, you got a ways to go."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh no!" And then you're killing all those eggs. You have to find those 15 eggs or whatever. And
I think it was 25.
Was it 25? Oh, you're right. No, it was 25.
Oh my god! When it said 25 eggs, I was like, "How do I not remember this?"
Yeah, yeah. And missing, I just was terrified I was going to miss one, and there's no good way to find them other than audio. So it's like, yeah.
I was very lucky in that I didn't, although I was certain that I had. And the last one, is pretty far along, and at that point I was like, oh man, I've missed one. I'm gonna have to go all the way back through that. I have no idea where I might have missed it, but to the game's credit, I didn't miss any.
Yep, me too.
So, despite the fact that I felt like it was very, very possible to miss them, I didn't miss any, and I was really thankful. To be honest, I was terrified I was going to have to make my way back through that whole area, hunting for eggs like it was Easter.
There was a couple that were hidden. I mean, you're pretty much a completionist, I think, as well, right? I mean, you'll find every nook and cranny. I can see generally. If you're not a completionist, you might miss one. There's that one that was in that in that duct sort of area behind a turret that was way tucked away that I happened upon there. That one probably would be easily missed as an example. But
yeah, that would probably be the only one. It's the only one I could think of that wasn't. I mean, even that one was pretty much on the path, and if you had to deal with the turret, you were probably going to be looking at it and seeing the thing kind of behind it.
Yeah.
For me, I was kind of poking my head up through a hole or something. I was like, oh, there's a turret, and I could see the egg right behind it. So it wasn't. Even that one didn't feel like I could see people missing it, but it didn't. To me, it didn't feel like, oh, that was really hidden. Yeah, it was surprising. I was glad at that point that I had kept some of those surgical table power on dealios.
Yeah.
Because I used one of those in the Rickenbacker. I ended up having one or two left over.
I did as well.
At the end of the game. So because I couldn't remember how starved for that particular resource I was going to be. Oh, actually, and then I used another one at the very end because there was an opportunity to do that there as well.
This interesting thing about the eggs that I made a small note on that I definitely appreciated the level design and sort of placement of them was really the audio and the three-dimensional audio of that stuff, because it's funny these days, right? We have, and you can probably speak to it better than I can on the technical side, but we had sort of the general goal right now of trying to simulate real audio as much as possible. And we talk a lot about occlusion and having audio be occluded by walls and things like that. But in this game, the fact that the sound was bleeding through geometry was actually really important for finding the eggs, because you knew you were near to one.
Absolutely.
And it could have been on the other side of the wall.
It reminded me of Sly Cooper. I mean,
I guess that's a good point.
It was the same thing, right? There were these like bottles or something that were specials or basically collectibles or something, and they had a sound that was, in all directions, and you would kind of go back through the level once you'd cleared out enemies and be paying attention to, like, okay, let me listen for that ting 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 ting, that it would make it as if it were bouncing off of stuff. Very similar kind of feeling that I had here, and the audio was a really good cue for the eggs. But I did legitimately feel terror that I was going to miss one and have no way. I mean, just like I would have, if we were not doing the podcast, I would have probably flipped my computer over and called it a day. But I didn't, so that was good.
Well, there's also no map for the Rickenbacker, really. So hard to, really figure out where you might have gone.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's no map really through that whole end of the game.
No.
So you've kind of gotten into I guess that made a certain amount of sense. Rickenbacker is a small ship. It's a Navy ship. It's attached onto the top of the Von Braun.
Yeah. Yeah,
and it's basically there as an escort or something, and I guess it piggybacked to do faster than light travel or whatever. So it was like a separate ship with its own complement of, military people. So I guess it made some sense. Plus it was upside down, so that would have been weird.
I still, having finished the game, still am not sure what the hell the whole Rickenbacker thing was all about. I mean, I remember the cinematic in the beginning of the game where they're talking about docking and all that stuff. And like you said, I guess it was a piggyback situation, like the space shuttle or something. But I don't know. It didn't. I still, even running through it, I was confused by it. Was, it felt just kind of literally and figuratively tacked on.
No, I would agree with that. And I guess the thing that was weird there was like go UNN. There's like a gung ho character who turned up on the audio logs
Yeah,
there.
you're right. Right.
And it was very like hooah,
More military, less
yeah,
civilian.
which was weird because the UNN is more of a something that mines corporations, but I guess it also has this military arm or something like that. I'd have to go back and sort of read through the fiction and try to figure out what that all meant, but some of those edges were a little frayed story wise, I think, or at
Yeah,
least they didn't come across. I mean, they may have made perfect amount of sense on the drawing board, but I think some of them just kind of get lost a little bit.
yeah. That's the point that I would make as well. That I wish I would have retained it more. It definitely seemed like it was well thought through enough, and I got the impression that there was a lot of detail there, and I'm pretty sure I found every audio log, and I just I didn't retain it enough to understand
Right.
it, or maybe I'm just dense, that just could be me. But
Well, these days you get an achievement; it would tell you you
right,
picked up every audio log.
yeah, good
I
point.
Yeah, and then I guess the other thing that the Rickenbacker, and we can move on from that. I guess the other thing that reminded me of was Thief and that weird house
Yeah,
with all the creepy, walls that twisted and all that stuff. I mean, here it was just inverted because gravity. You had to flip gravity to, I don't know, make something stable so it wouldn't explode. I don't. That kind of went over my head.
that was a stretch.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, but then you walked into the space and it was inverted, so you got to have an inverted cross and have it not be a satanic, but still feel like a little weird. Like walking into that room, I was like, "Oh, there's a chapel on board the Rickenbacker, and now it's inverted. That's weird."
yeah.
So there's a
There,
lot of kind of little stuff in there that was nice. That was a tough room.
a lot of weird, yeah, just commentary in this game that definitely seemed, each designer must have had their personal thing they wanted to
Yeah, to
talk about.
accentuate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that was interesting. Well, let's move into the body of the many.
Oh, really
Um,
quick, really quick. Let
yeah,
me.
yeah, go ahead.
I need to set the stage for the end for me because before we move into that, and we can right afterwards. The quick story I'll tell for the end of the Von Braun leading into the Rickenbacker was that shuttle section where you had to blow up the two shuttles.
Right.
And for whatever reason, and this is context for later, I I guess I thought I was managing my resources fine, and so I figured I would be okay. But obviously, a lot of hard enemies in that area, so I probably expended a lot more. And as you said, all of my resources are focused on side, right? Which
Right.
ultimately results in really nanites, because that's the only way I can get hypos, or if I
Right.
find them.
Right. Right.
Anyway, I had gotten down to, I blew up the first shuttle, and then you needed to get that shield, regulator thing to take the shield out of the second one. And I was down to 4 psi points. Now, 4 psi points is the exact number that I need to turn on invisibility, which is the main way that I actually can escape any particular situation. And so I was down to 4. Everybody on the way out was still alive because I had invisibilitied my way through to get inside. So I knew that I had that one,
One
basically,
shard.
yep, and I was down to probably 10 health.
Oh.
And because of that one part of that quest or mission where you actually have to spend 100 nanites to actually buy the device that disables the shields, I couldn't buy more hypos. So and the only way I could have actually, I guess, and I wanted to talk about this specifically because if I would have not had those 100 hypos, I don't know. I guess I would have had to have gone back to older levels and basically farmed
Yeah,
because
I think you would have.
there's
Yeah.
no other way for me to get nanites. So luckily I had enough, but it was like I had 102 or something.
Oh my goodness.
So,
You were
I was down.
pretty thin. I was in much better shape at that point, for sure.
Well, so this kind of moment was what I was dreading for the rest of the game, because I was like, okay, this is it. This is how I'm feeling. This is the situation I'm in now. I can only imagine it'll only get worse from here on out. Which again, I'll tell you the contrast when we get there. So anyway, obviously I did it. I spent the nanites. I had no hypos left, so I couldn't actually get any more. And so I disabled the shield, had to run around. I couldn't take a hit from anything. So I had to run around as the countdown was going down around the shuttle.
Like a horde of those zombies that come down that hallway besides.
Right. But I put invisibility on as I was going down the grav lift. And obviously I didn't know those zombies were going to be coming. And I just hightailed it straight through all the zombies. The mech that was there. The big rumbler was still alive because I never kill the rumblers. And I just ran by all of them. And then after the bulkhead, there was one spider that I had to run. And when you go through the level load, it resets your invisibility. So then I had no psi. Had to jump over the spider, make sure he didn't hit me, and then get inside the tram and get out of there before he got into the tram with me.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's pretty good.
So it was like I said before, it was very puzzly.
Yeah, you missed a thing, which I'll tell you about. So if you go, there's a ladder down there. I mean, this is not critical path. You don't have to go there. If you go down the steps, the ladder into that bay where you've just blown up the thing with the shield disruptor or whatever, there's another cargo bay, and she basically says, "Don't go in there. There'll be problems if you go in there." So
I tried to go in, but it wouldn't. That was the one that I thought was broken.
No, you can get in there. So I saved right after I blew up the shield, and I went to that room, and there's a bunch of audio logs which basically tell more of what Shodan's up to, which is, she's gonna take over the ship. She kind of foreshadows what's going on at the end, which we'll get to, and it talks about how this other character died, Delacroix, because basically she met her end at this area. And she also talks a little bit about you and how you are like, you had your memory wiped against your will, which was already kind of been talked about in another section of the game. And you can kind of go through there and pick up all this information. And then when you come out, she goes, "Well, I hope you enjoyed that." And she takes away a bunch of cyber modules. And she's like, I can give and I can take away.
Whoa.
Like, yeah, it was cool. And so then what happens is going up that hallway, I was surprised by those zombies, and they killed me because I had thought that area was clear,
right?
Which, of course, is what you're meant to think. And so I had not saved again before, going through that because it wasn't very challenging. I mean, there was some cyber midwives and stuff. There was a challenge, but it wasn't overwhelming. And so I had gone all through that. I came out, I had low health. I'm like, I'll just, go back and, maybe buy some hypos or something like that. And I got killed. And so then I reloaded, having not done that. And so I didn't lose my cyber modules, but I got all the story.
Whoa. So you didn't go back in the room yourself?
I didn't go back into it and do it again. And I'm glad I didn't, because those cyber modules sure came in handy at the end of the game. And we can get to that.
Yeah. Wow. Do you remember how many she took away?
It wasn't a huge number, but it was like a level of stuff, like 8 or 10.
Yeah.
Which is enough for a level of hacking, which is what I needed it for.
Yeah. Wow. So I just thought, because the first side, the side of that cargo chamber, the door, when you're coming into the area, the door was broken. Right. And then,
right, I think so, yeah.
And then after I blew up the shuttle, I tried to, go up to the door. It didn't seem to open, or maybe I was just so, you know what it was? I was trying to get out of the way of the explosion, and I probably just ran up the ladder as quickly as I could because I couldn't die.
Right.
And I just didn't try the door.
Just didn't go back down. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Wow.
All right, now let's go into the body of the menu.
Okay. So
this was very frustrating for me.
What happened?
Not only because there was no map, but because I was at this point starting to get pretty starved for resources, and the resources that I had held were no good for close combat because there were grenade launchers, which do splash damage, and the fusion cannon, which does splash damage, and is not terribly effective against those floating brain.
Those things are bastards, man.
Yeah, they're terrible. And they don't make sense to me because there's an audio log that says their actual physical form is easy to kill. It's the projections will just keep coming back. right? So you actually kill. There's like some weird.
They respawn.
You know, they'll respawn if you don't kill like the actual brain, which is somewhere else nearby.
Okay, that's what those were. Okay, I killed those brains. I didn't realize they were connected.
Right, but the thing is when you kill them, the projections don't go away. So it's like, well, what's projecting this now? I don't get it. Because that's the first thing I did in that final room was like, okay, I'll go kill all those things because that'll make those projections go away, and then they don't.
But they won't respawn after you kill them once.
But they won't respawn at that point, so that is a benefit. But at that point, that was not like
that room was terrible. Yeah,
we'll get there. All right, so we get into the body of the money. We basically fire the Rickenbacker's engines or shuttle engines into the body of the many. I guess it's a shuttle of some kind.
Yeah,
and it's this huge, fleshy, almost Cthulhu-esque kind of, I don't know, cancer. It's like an enormous space tumor that had grown around the outsides of the ships. So you embed into there, and of course you have no bearings, no map. There's not really even any way to kind of keep track of where you are, unless you kind of doodle a map or something like that on a piece of paper. And I spent a lot of time running around there trying to figure out just what I needed to do to get the door open to move to the next area.
Mm-hmm.
There's audio logs for it. And he says, well, I think that this thing, when it opens, I see activity in these two other things, but I'm hoping that if you shoot them, you get the opposite effect and it opens. I was like, okay, I guess that means I got to go find two things to shoot. And ultimately I did, but it meant going into irradiated water.
Yep.
And swimming around in there for a while. And thankfully I had lots of rad hypos left, but I did do that once and have to reload and do it again because I got just so irradiated, having a hard time finding those things. I got so lost, way more lost than in any of the other levels. And I think it's because of the organic nature of the map at that point, right? It's not straight lines and there's no sort of reasonable landmarks. It's like, oh, I'm in this flooded area, not the other flooded area, and not the other flooded area. It's just like I had a very hard time sort of keeping track of where I was. And so that was pretty frustrating.
Did you see the blue vein thing that he was describing in the audio log? Did that help you at all? Because I made a note of that being at least one saving grace from a level design perspective that they decided to do.
Oh, I probably missed that.
So the blue, makes sense. The literally they called them the sphincter door, which I think is hilarious and awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
The sphincter doors had the blue veins, which, as I'm saying these sentences, I'm regretting it more and more. The blue veins are leaving the sphincter door, and if you follow them through the level, they go to the things you're supposed to blow up.
Oh, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, and so
did not. I mean, I tried shooting those things, but It did not. That did not connect. Yeah, I didn't get that. So yeah, that would have helped a lot.
Yeah, that sucks then. Yeah, because I wrote a note down on the positive side of that is that at least because they don't do this ever in the rest of the game where they have generally anything connecting, like one important thing connected to another important thing. Almost never. They could have done that throughout the ships easily with like conduits.
Yeah, it would have made it. Yeah, it would have made
energy
sense.
And things, which has kind of become a common trope these days. But at least here, because you didn't have a map, I was just following those blue veins. And I'm such a completionist that I kind of ended up memorizing a little bit, right? Because I wanted to find every nook and cranny. But one big advantage that I think I have potentially over you in those situations of kind of exploration and finding your way is I have invisibility. And I just turned that on. It only costs 4. And at that point, and I can jump into this in a second, I had as much psi as I needed. And I just would invisibility my way through, skip everything, all the enemies, and find what I needed to, and then replay that section if I needed to, if I had to kill anything. But it made it really easy for me to get around everybody that way.
Yeah, and whereas I had to kill everything.
Yeah, right.
And at that point, I had basically the assault rifle that I was using with anti-personnel rounds, which are really good against the flesh things. So the big tank guys,
rumblers, I think.
rumblers, yeah. And but as I got deeper into the ship, I had less and less of those things. So, as I got to that final room, and the final room is crazy. It's basically a puzzle of what do I need to to shoot in order to progress. And there's these 3 like floating orbs that are circling the thing. It's kind of like Quake, right? Quake had a similar.
Oh yeah, you're right. I think so.
Quake or Quake 2. I think it was the original Quake.
I think it was original Quake. Yeah.
Yeah. Very similar to that. So there's these 3 orbiting things, and you got to shoot those. But it's a room filled with rumblers, these floating projections, and then some spiders. Like, it's all the bad stuff in that room,
Yeah.
And
one place.
Yeah, and at that point, all I had was a handful of assault rifle anti-personnel rounds, which are like 4-shot kills against the rumblers. And then I had different types of grenades, and I had the fusion cannon, which is equivalent to one of the big mech's guns. It's like some kind of energy
wow.
or something like that, and it's explosive, so it does a lot of damage. But it doesn't really do much against the projections, the psi things. So I basically ran in circles around that room, and then I'd cross through the center, and I'd try to hit one of the floating orb things. And if I hit one, I'd save as I ran across the other side, because I had to stay ahead of the rumblers because I couldn't take care of them.
Yeah.
And so I just was circling and circling and circling. I must have done it 10 times.
Yeah.
At least. I spent probably 45 minutes in that one room. Easily.
That's what when you texted me, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh my God.
Circle strafe.
And now I'll tell you what happened when I played that in Scion Hard. I put on God mode because screw that.
Oh, are you serious?
I did.
On your first playthrough, you mean?
Yep, originally. In fact, I had put it down.
Oh, snap.
Because I was so annoyed that was that difficult. I was so annoyed that I put it down like for a year. And then I came back and I found a cheat for God mode, and I just put on God mode so I could see the end of the game.
Yeah.
Because I was so angry, and mostly at myself. Because why? I probably could have changed the level of difficulty there, and it didn't occur to me. But I had gotten to that point, and I had no resources left.
Yeah.
I had like 1 side hypo when I played that the first time, and I had spent a lot on like research and stuff as well, I think. So I'd kind of split my investment.
Yeah.
In a not good way. I had like exotic weapons as well. Because I was using that spiky thing.
Did you use the worm gun thing at all?
I did it in my original playthrough, but not this time.
Okay.
This time I ended up taking 1 level of exotic weapons because I was worried as I was getting to the end that I wasn't going to be able to do it with the weapons I had. Yeah. And I wanted to have that as a backup of like, okay, well, I know I can pick up that spiky thing, and I can pick up that annelid gun, and I can maybe use those, and then maybe they'll be a little bit different and they'll work okay. Because I think those are pretty effective against those types of enemies. But I didn't end up needing it or using it at all. I had used it in the original playthrough of the game.
I was just curious on what it did, because I knew I was never going to get to use it.
So. They're pretty effective, but there's not a ton of ammo. And I think the crystal shard thing might even take psi points. Oh. So when I originally played, it was like splitting my psi resource to even use that thing, although it was very effective. So, playing on hard that original time, I was just so starved at the end.
Oh yeah.
Limping through, and then got to that final room, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
And just put it down. So I didn't do that this time.
So it's yeah. I mean, to talk about, by the time I had gotten through the Rickenbacker, by the end of that, right before getting into the body of the many, I think I don't know if it was part of their plan or not, but through the way that the level design was structured, I don't know if it was that I didn't find a replicator till the end or what, but because of that, I ended up saving up and hoarding up all of my resources until the end of the Rickenbacker. And what I mentioned last time, what I I've been doing toward the end of the game, obviously, is saving and collecting ammo because I convert it into nanites with that one psi ability. Right. So what ended up happening at the end of the Rickenbacker, when I got to that final replicator area, and I had collected a few psi hypos coming out of my my big deficit at the end of the Von Braun, I basically had more psi than I could use because I had converted all of the ammo. I had all these extra ones that I found. I basically was very economical throughout the Rickenbacker. And so when I entered the body of the many, I had 18 psi hypos.
Wow.
Which was like the most I'd ever had at one time. Up to that point was like 5. And so I was like, wow, this is going to be amazing. And I could not believe it. And it wasn't really the plan. I guess I just had saved up, And so I went into the body of the many completely opposite of what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to be, like just tiptoeing around piece by piece. And I still did that to be conservative. But I kind of went in fearless, and I was using invisibility whenever I wanted to. The other combo that I discovered, which was a tier 5, was the it's called construction. No, what's it called? Construction or something like that. It basically, I'll have to find the name of it. I didn't write it down for some reason. It's the one that basically turns them against their enemies.
Oh, okay.
And so that's how it dealt with almost all of the rumblers up through the Rickenbacker as well. And so for, again, a very economical price of essentially nanites and psi, I basically turn rumblers against their enemies, and then the rumblers just go and take out everything. And I'm just sitting back watching. Like, I don't use any resources.
Oh, that's good.
And that's how I the only thing that the rumblers are not good for is those floating guys that are in the last room. And so I still had to also circle strafe my way through that room. I did luckily have on the tier 5. There's also the really good damage shield that is like 60% damage reduction.
Okay.
And so I turned that on, circle strafe my way around, blew up those those star orb things that were the shielding it. And then while the rumblers were fighting the floating guys and the spiders and anything else that came in, and I would just charm them as the charm ran off. Hit invisibility when I needed to, because then it kind of resets everything, and they don't find me anyway. And then eventually blew the thing up. Yeah.
Wow.
So
your final build was like all psi powers, more psi powers than you needed.
More than I needed. Yeah, I didn't even use a lot of them. Yep.
Yeah.
And once I found the combo of that, the one where you charm them, disruption or whatever it's called, like that and invisibility combo basically won the game for me, because I could turn rumblers and midwives, right? I would just send one midwife after another midwife, and they would duke it out, and then the one that lived barely had life left, and I would just go duke it out.
Yeah, just go hit it with a wrench.
Yeah.
And I would, I saved my heavy weaponry to the end, but it all had the splash damage. And I was just like, oh no, because those rumblers, they just chase after you.
Yeah.
And so they're always close. And so if I ever fired, I was doomed. And you can't use any of the electrical weapons on them. They basically don't work. So my final build was, I was maxed out on 3 types of weapons. Sort of the basic weapons, which are the gun and the shotgun and the assault rifle, the energy weapons, and then the heavy weapons, which were the grenade launcher and the fusion cannon. So I was maxed out in those. I was maxed out in strength, I think. Yes, because I wanted to carry the heavy armor. So I had the heavy armor. And then finally, I think I maxed out endurance, which basically gives you the hit points. So those were where all my investments were going into the end of the game.
Yeah, so mine was complete psi. I did max out my strength because I wanted to. Oh, that's the other thing. By the end, because I'm not actually sure how this happened either, but I had more. I basically was spending cyber modules willy-nilly at that point, because I didn't necessarily need anything, so I was kind of wasting them in a way, not to like gloat or anything, but I was
hoarding them. I was legitimately like, I don't know what's left I'm going to hold on to these.
Right.
And I'm glad I did. And we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, and so I had I ended up maxing out because I didn't do any weapons or very much tech. I did do hacking because I wanted to hack turrets occasionally and stuff. But then I had my strength maxed out, my endurance maxed out, and my agility maxed out at the end. So I was running fast. I had 60 hit points, and I could wear the heaviest armor. But then otherwise, it was all like I said. I think I ended up purchasing all of the level 5 psi abilities. I didn't get a lot of the ones lower down, other than the basics.
Right.
And then focused on, and then just that combo of agility or invisibility. I'm trying to find the name of it, but the charming one, and a few other, adrenaline to up my
your wrench,
up my hand to hand, and that shield that reduces 60% of the damage. A few things like that. Just really, I don't know. I happened upon it pretty good.
At that point, you must have been not taking any damage anyway.
Very little. Yeah, very little. Yeah. So when I was circle strafing around that room, I never found a good way to deal with the floating enemies. Like I couldn't. Oh, the other thing that I used a lot was the pyro blast. That basically takes out any biological enemy in 1 or 2 shots. Jeez. Even midwives, because I had maxed psi, my psi stat out. So I think it was just doing a hell of a lot of damage.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I think playing it on hard, the first time out, really gave me a different.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, just a different feeling for the psi. So if I had played the Marine or whatever in that version, I probably would have been getting my ass kicked as well. So not surprising.
Hard, yeah. I don't ever want to play this game on hard.
Well, I'm not playing much on hard anymore. And then I guess the last thing we should probably just touch on is the very end of the game and confronting Shodan. In her lair. What a weird thing. I think having played it on God mode, I basically dismissed kind of the end of the game. Like I remembered that one terrible room in the body of the many, and then like I just blanked out the rest of it. But I was glad that I had been hoarding cyber modules because I ended up buying a lot of hacking at that point because I got into her final room, which requires hacking, and my hacking was really low. The percentages were very high, and I was doomed. So I went back to the beginning of that section, reloaded a save.
Okay.
Bought up as much cyber and hacking as I could afford, and then went back through it all again, just using my weapons as much as I, whatever, just fire like crazy, EMP, laser, just like use it all because it's, you don't get to save it. But then got to that final room, and even then it was really, really difficult for me because, she sends these, projections of herself around to fight you. And I didn't do a ton of hacking throughout the game and never was kind of really quick with it. So I'm like in there, I'm like clicking and I'm like trying to analyze quickly, like where's the best place to click so I know if I'm going to need to reset anyway. Like I would pick junctions where I'm like, okay, if this is good, then it's good, and I get multiple chances. Otherwise, I just hit reset. Meanwhile, she's just sending things against me again and again and again. So I did the same thing there, where I'm basically just like, oh, good, I got one safe. At that point, I had no hypos left, and I had one med, full health med kit thing. So I was pretty shot by the end, and I just managed to do it through save-scumming, which is not great, in my opinion. Was that also a cakewalk for you at that point?
So I wanted to ask you, the weird, I don't know what you call it, mishmash of art style, psychedelic section before you get to the end, where there's like ghost cyber ninjas and all that stuff. Yes. How was that part for you?
That part was easy.
Okay.
That part was fine because I had, I had energy weapons and I could recharge them, and I had a surgeon table, power thing. So I just, I had plenty.
Killed everything.
But it's right. It was just easy. I just killed everything. Okay. It was fine. That was no problem at all. By that point, I was actually really good against the ninjas, and it just wasn't was no hassle at all. Got through that. The floating around, solids basically, for lack of 3D solids.
Oh yeah, the
As those would
geometric
pass
shape.
through me, that would take damage from them passing through me.
Yeah.
But it was pretty minor. I did fall out of the ship several times in that final shaft, jumping down to try to get to the access point for Shodan. But weird ending to a weird game.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I had a vague memory of that section once it starts getting kind of psychedelic from the first playthrough. Very, very vague, but it didn't. I don't know. That section doesn't hold up, I think, as well as the rest of the game did when it comes to kind of a cohesive vision, so to speak.
Right.
Art vision
Right.
there, and so really kind of broke my immersion there. I obviously I knew what they were trying to do, but kind of. And then the other thing is I just invisibled my way through that whole, so I just kind of ran around and refreshed invisible and didn't touch any enemies and just kind of, eventually found the way down. For the very end for Shodan, I had, like I said before, I definitely had upped my hack because I wanted to take advantage of that earlier in the game, and so I guess I was in a good spot with hacking, and I just put. The interesting thing about both those floating fleshy enemies and obviously her at the end and her projections is that none of my side tricks really worked on them. I found the name of the ability.
The charm.
Yeah, it's called restructuring.
Restructuring.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, the restructuring was definitely my best friend. But anyway, it didn't work on those projections of those fleshy, floating things. So that's why I never was able to take those out, and it didn't work at the end either. But my hacking seemed to be pretty good. I think I might have failed on one of them. But the other thing is I just put that 60% shield on, and I kind of just soaked up the damage.
Right. Well, between that and having the heavy armor.
Yeah, right.
That adds right up, So you probably were taking virtually no damage, except maybe from the electrified floor.
Yep.
Yeah, I was getting just crushed in there. Just
crushed.
Yeah.
So very different feel of the ending than I recall when I played it the first time with Reed.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was just as hard as the last time.
Yeah.
Although I fought my way through it. All right.
Yeah. Wow.
You ready for a break?
Yeah, let's take a break. Yeah.
Let's take a quick break.
Okay.
We'll come back with some pillars.
We must destroy the Von Braun. But before we can separate the Rickenbacker, we must remove the foul black eggs the many has vomited on this deck. These eggs are an experiment of the many, and will in time spawn the next generation of annelid, which you will have no hope of destroying. Steel yourself for a struggle, human. They fear you, for you are my avatar.
And we're back from break. We're gonna finish off this final sort of playthrough edition of the game podcast to talk about some basically the things that we'd like to carry forward. Things that we would consider reusing, or things that were in the design that were surprising or particularly strong to us. What do you say, Tim?
Yeah, I think a few different themes came up for me, and we've been hitting them throughout each of the episodes for sure. But to kind of summarize some of my thoughts, there's two, pillars or themes that surfaced for me that are interesting because I think there's a natural tension between the two of them, and they actually conflict. And maybe it's because two different designers were on each one, or maybe it was intentional. But I actually thought there was a lot of economy to the design, and I mean for Brett and I, having been around making games for a while, I think we may remember back in those days where the economical designing, choices and decisions we would make, design decisions, would actually come through necessity of just the game development process. You kind of had to be economical with the way you designed your enemies. To give one example that was a minor little touch that, again, hard to say if it was intentional or not, but the monkeys is the one that always comes to mind, in that they were ranged, and so very simple, paradigm there. They were also short, and so for me, and I think a lot of people, if you didn't have a good ranged weapon, you'd run up to them. But then when you would swing your weapon, the spider's the same way. You go right over their head, right? So there's this really simple thing there that, again, maybe it was just accidental, because some of that stuff happens accidentally, but there was a lot of stuff in the way that they would design their enemies that I thought was really economical and simple, and then they had a lot of good variants of each of the enemies, especially in the kind of the big mech walker things, right?
Right. And I think with the those shorter creatures, there have been other games that have done that where that has been thoroughly frustrating, and here it never felt that way. Like, they're just annoyances in a lot of games, and here they're a real threat.
Yeah.
So I think that because they actually took that a different direction, they didn't make small equal weak. They made small equal different sort of challenge.
Yeah.
And that was a good choice. They wanted basically all of their enemies to pay off really well. The thing that's basically the weakest is the thing that looks most like you. It's the humans.
Yep. Yeah, there's just a value to, the other theme that we talk a lot about in good enemy design, at least in my opinion, is sort of the orthogonal nature of the enemies, and they all very, very much fulfill their own roles, and you have to change your tactical thinking with each one, and then, which this game was doing before, say, Halo, but I think Halo 1 did a lot of good things in this regard too.
Absolutely.
Once you start mixing, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we totally stole it for Commando, and once you start mixing those orthogonal enemies together, it really does create a different encounter in a very simple and economical way. So that was one theme. The other one that causes attention with this theme, though, is the resource design and the resource management side of it, which they're probably very heavily taking from survival horror games at the time, Resident Evil, or what have you. And I feel like they went overboard in that regard. And I guess because they chose to go after RPG, which is clearly another pillar for them, that means you're going to have to spread their wealth out, right? They kind of peanut butter their way through a lot of different resources, because they have to support all the different classes that people might and specs that people might build. So from a balancing systemic perspective, like, the system designers had their work cut out for them, because
absolutely.
And I'd say both of us hit locations where the balance didn't actually quite hit. Like, it felt like I almost broke the game a couple times, and so, no one's perfect for sure. I'm definitely not. So I definitely had their work cut out for them. But those two themes were
and I think for me, like you're talking about, like, where the systems guys had their jobs cut out for them, is for me playing a weapons focused character. I really, in choosing to focus on weapons, also had to focus on maintenance, because my weapons are going to break. And in this very sort of realistic world, I've got these weapons that don't even hold up as well as an AK-47 does today. It's like a few shots, and then this gun has dropped a level of quality. It does less damage, et cetera, et cetera. I totally get why that's this way in this game, but with all the sort of tendency towards a reality, and we'll get to that in a moment with sort of world design, but with the sort of realism, an establishment of a consistent world, that was the one thing that just rings totally false. Like, your side pump there never, like, the really experimental technology of the game, not firing a slug of metal through a cylinder like we've been doing at this point for half a millennium in that game. It's not that's the problem.
Right.
I mean, it's not the thing that you plug into your arm that controls power in your brain that gives you problems and breaks down. It's the gun. So it's a little weird. I totally get, like, and at the same time, academically, like you'll say sometimes, I totally understand, like, they want that tension, and it's not, it's a game that never feels like a power fantasy, despite the fact that it's still a power fantasy. Like, you're still going to come out in the end. You just feel under pressure all the time. You never feel empowered. And for a warrior-focused guy like I played this time, that meant my weapons had to break down. So I get why.
Yeah.
But it is like a weird note. It feels, one of the games I referenced on the break was, Far Cry 2, where you felt powerful and your weapons would jam and it was a hiccup and you're like, oh my God, now I have to react to that. Here it's like, I don't know if I want to use my gun because it might break and then I won't have it and I'll need to repair it, which is a skill I haven't put points into. And then I'll have to find another one of that type. It's like this constant, like, my main avenue of power is something I can't rely on. And that's how they kind of unsettle you. So like I said, I get it. But at the same time, it's like
it broke you out of it.
It did, because it meant choosing to go with weapons meant I had to choose these other skills.
Yeah.
Which,
I mean,
which didn't feel like it that way.
Sorry. Yeah. The one thing I will say about that, though, other than it breaking you out of it, the sort of matrix of how the systems do cross over with each other, each one, I definitely appreciate that, and I don't think we do enough of that in games these days,
Right.
for sure. And I think a lot of the sort of foundational designers from Looking Glass and from Irrational are still kind of the best at it, right? When we look at things like Dishonored and those sorts of more modern games that are kind of had their genesis and stuff like this. But at the time, I remember when this game came out, and maybe this is revisionist history on my part, but I feel like I remember thinking, even though the shooter aspect of this was very diminished and kind of not matching expectation, there was a sort of like, I remember Reed Knight and I, who was my partner when I played this co-op, we would talk about this, that, it was almost like, I remember the sense of a permission to do things differently than Quake and Doom and, all of those games. Like, oh, there are different ways to actually make a first-person shooter, and it's okay. Right. And you can balance it to be still terrifying and fun and occasionally feel like this great sense of accomplishment. But it didn't have to be the same rocket jumps and, and rocket launching sort of, model as really as that's all we had really seen up to that point, other than maybe Half-Life, right?
Right, and I think other games typically would, kind of disempower the shooter by restricting ammo and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that ties into these other systems. Like, well, yeah, but you've got these replicators, so you could make more. So you probably wouldn't get down to that moment if the guns didn't break. You wouldn't get down to a moment of like, I'm hiding behind this corner because I've only got maybe 2 shots out of this gun. Like, it leads to good moments. It just forces you, it just forces your hand in some ways if you're gonna be successful. And even then, getting to the end of the game and feeling like I was overpowered to go into those final fights, like, oh, I'm good. I've got the best weapons, and I was really, really screwed. So it was really weird. I was just weird. To how some of those things turn out. I was able to make it through the game, so I really can't argue or complain. But I did feel like that was the one thing that doesn't tie in real well with sort of the reality, of the situation.
Right.
But
the other two,
I don't know.
The other two themes that we talked about on break that we can hit really quick too is I wanted to talk about the world design, level design side of things, and then also story stuff. Kind of the thematic way that they deliver story, and especially at the time, and we should talk a little bit about Bioshock maybe too. But
yeah, absolutely.
On the world design thing, is just overall, I'm sure anyone playing this will see this as well. But the sense that this is a connected world, and that through the quick level loads, well, quick for us these days, I guess, on our modern machines, but you can go all the way back to the beginning. Once you're in the Rickenbacker, you can travel all the way back down, and it essentially is all still a connected world if you so choose. And that, at the time, was definitely not a common thing.
That was, I guess the Underworld games were probably similar in that respect, but they felt different. They felt much more heavily on the RPG end of things, whereas this being both a survival horror and a shooter and an RPG, it was surprising to see them keep that from an RPG. And even in RPGs at the time, it's not like, there are times when you're in, I don't know, Baldur's Gate or something, you can't go back. This is a story point where it's like, oh, you're not going back past here. And that still happens today. not in open world games usually, but in other sorts of RPGs, be just like, oh, yep, now you've gone to a different continent, or whatever, you've gone to another planet, in something like a Mass Effect, and you're not going back, or the Citadel has changed, or whatever. And this is more like this whole world is one connected place. It functions. It has all the things that you would want from what is essentially a floating city. Um, I didn't find a bowling alley, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's one in there. There's just zero G bowling. It's just everything you could want. Including nightclubs and a mall and gardens. I mean, just everything. I can't think of a thing that feels like it's missing. Even though some of that stuff seems strange just from my sort of years of watching Star Trek sensibility of like, there's an awful lot of stuff on the ship from the original series. It's still, on the other hand, that's what they went for. They committed to it, and they basically made one of their things like, this is going to be a place that feels like a real place, and the player is going to be able to move about freely. In my original playthrough, I think that actually worked against me a bit, because I was often, and you were often, lost this time. But I was sometimes lost between decks. Like, I would go back because I'd feel like I didn't have enough stuff, and I'd go looking for things. But I did play on a harder level of difficulty the first time we played the game. So yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, I love that I can hop in the elevator and I go back, as you do very, towards the end of this game, and I go back up to the engine core, and I'm like, oh, that's what that room was. Like, that room I couldn't get into, that,
that was a
and
good example.
It's like, oh, of course, it makes total sense. I need to go back up there to set some override. And so I'm, it's economical level design too, in the sense of like, I'm getting to, get another half hour out of this space or whatever. Which is really great, especially at the time would have been a really big deal. Like, let's save some money, by being able to reuse these spaces. But they feel confusing in the way, when we would get lost, they feel confusing in the way a human space feels. That you're not super familiar with. If you go to a mall you've never been to for the first time, and somebody says, I'll meet you at the Spencer's, it's not going to be like, oh, I know exactly where that is. You're going to end up walking this way and looking at a map and being not really sure where you are, and then going this way. Oh no, let me retread. It's exactly like that. It's a really good space.
It's not far off from what you would expect. I think the only thing that I definitely wish, and I'm glad that games have modernized more in an area of usability and kind of UX, I guess, because that example you gave about the engine core, or going back to that room that's multiple floors down, that was locked originally, which I actually spent a little time trying to figure out why I couldn't get into that room when I found it the first time. But and they give you a checklist in the HUD of objectives that have some descriptors about where to go, but the map I found generally very useless to me. I had a hard time using it myself, and then they never really give you objective indicators or anything like that to help you along the way. It's very much like, you better listen hard to what people are saying. And
even in this part of the game, I missed stuff that you picked up, and same thing in other episodes going the other way.
So
yeah, and that's definitely, and that's something that we took to heart for Republic Commando, trying to make a more mainstream game, right? Is that we were always very clear, this is what you're doing.
Yeah.
It was always, we put that right on the screen. Like, if you forget, just look at the top of your HUD, and there it is. And I think we even did that in the Starfighter games, if I'm
we
not
did,
mistaken. Yeah. For the same reason, it's just sometimes you're in a firefight when that information comes in, and if you missed it and it's not available to you any other way,
you're screwed. Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to ask somebody who worked on the game if they had thought about the audience they were going after, because I think with the Star Wars stuff we worked on, I think that often ended up being part of the conversation with how we would deal with usability, because we knew or assumed or hoped that Star Wars was going to be reaching a broader, maybe more casual audience, and so we wanted to maybe hold hands a little bit more. And whether they thought about it for this game or cared, or whether they were kind of just making the game that they wanted to make. And sometimes that's a good thing, right? Maybe
right.
that motivation can create gems like this game, which I think is a gem.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So
I mean, it's been great to revisit it.
Yeah.
Just absolutely fantastic. Let's, I guess, touch on the storytelling as
Yep.
our sort of last thing, and then we'll take another quick break and talk about what's left in our discussions of System Shock 2. But because we are going to have one more episode. Yeah, I mean, what I was saying in the break is it turns out you can go home again. This story so much underlines and informs Bioshock's story that, I mean, it was to a degree that I had entirely forgotten. You
Me
know,
too.
there was 7 or 8 years between when I played those games, and I had totally missed a lot of stuff. Even the storytelling devices, I had not. I should have made those connections. I certainly, I mean, it has shock in the title. I should have I should have gotten back to them. Oh yeah, they did all that storytelling that way. But I guess just the amount of time that had gone by, maybe not remember. They had done a lot of other sorts of games in between, the Freedom Forces and like SWAT and other things. So I just guess I kind of lost track of that. But yeah, I mean the parallels to Bioshock are really apparent.
Yeah, way closer than I had realized. I feel like if I had played System Shock 2 right before playing Bioshock, I would have been more disappointed in Bioshock, if that
Yeah.
makes sense, you know. And
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
There are
just,
beat for beat, like, oh, that's the same. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
and I would have seen the twist coming and things like that, right? I think just would have been more apparent. And it's funny how memory works, especially mine because I have a terrible one. But I remember even when Bioshock came out and talking about, audio logs that just play while you're, even though it was pretty modern, they just play while you're playing, and you just start them talking and you keep shooting on your merry way. And System Shock 2 had done that, and I had forgotten, and just the way that they had established characters through the rhythm of how you find the audio logs and revisited those characters and had the character arcs.
Right. Yeah. Each character having its own story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, in this one, having, it sort of is at the very end, but the story of these two characters who escaped, who are in the only other cutscene really of the game. You see them running off down a hallway, and then you get down to their escape pod and they go away. Their story was, probably the most complex story in the audio logs in the game, because it was these two characters. You first encounter Rebecca, I think, when you're heading to the cargo bays, because she's talking about going, 20 billion miles from home and finding a man, right? And you kind of follow them throughout the game. There's a good emotional payoff there, and of course, the game wants to yank the rug out from under you at the very end, which is kind of interesting. Setting up a System Shock 3, I assume that never came at that point. Although we'll be seeing it soon.
I guess we'll see. Yeah.
I'm curious whether they'll do that or whether they'll be. Yeah, I'm really curious about that game. I hadn't specifically been anticipating System Shock 3, and I just thought it was kind of a weird choice. But then playing System Shock 2 again, I'm like, oh yeah, I totally want more of this.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Because I think Bioshock, while it does a lot of story stuff that's similar, I don't think it has nearly the depth in the system stuff.
No.
And the world is pretty connected, but it's not as connected. I think there's bigger breaks. You might be able to go back a pretty far ways in that game, but I think there is like a definite break where it's like, okay, now you're in part 2 and you're not really going to be able to go back from here. I think that's after Atlas and all that stuff is revealed.
Yeah, I feel like there are bigger breaks along the way. I guess it wasn't every level, but I feel like it was level by level, but I could be wrong on that one.
Yeah, I mean, you can go back. There's less reason to, and the story certainly doesn't take you back. Here it makes sense. Like, oh, you go here, and it's like you need to do this thing. Well, that's an engineering. Sorry, and I think in Bioshock, where it's more, these are like living locations and things like that. It's there's less of an engineering. It's more like just a city.
Yeah.
even though they certainly would have some sort of engineering needs, civic engineering needs, it's sort of, I don't know, more distributed throughout the game and not, everything's kind of local. So I don't know, it's just kind of different. But yeah, I mean, playing that story again and having Shodan reappear, I mean, even knowing that was coming, it was still like pretty chilling. And really made me go, oh yeah, this is way Bioshock. Bioshock is way this.
We forgot to mention the little. Well, I forgot to mention the hilarious little moment during the end cinematic when the character speaks. I think he might be speaking for the first time. And he says one word before
he says one word
before he shoots her with a shotgun. Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to shoot this AI with a shotgun. He just says nah. It's like, it's ridiculous. That was probably Ken's voice or something like that too.
Yeah, like ridiculous. I wonder. Yeah, that was pretty funny. All right, let's take another quick break. Unless you've got something else.
No, I was just going to say I'm happy we played this for our first series.
It's a good one to return to, and definitely the sorts of games we'd like to be able to examine. We hope they're all nearly this rich. Okay, let's take another quick break. We'll come back, talk about what we're playing, and what's up for our 5th episode on System Shock, a 5th bonus beta episode that we want to share our plans with you. So wait just a second. We'll be back.
Join me, human, and we can move. And we can move together.
Nah.
Welcome back from the break. We're going to quickly go over what we've been playing and talk about our special 5th episode that we teased in the last segment, and then talk about what we want to do moving forward with the podcast in general. First up, what you've been playing, Tim?
Well, I'm still playing The Witcher 3, fortunately or unfortunately, as the case may be. The only quick thing I wanted to mention, because of our last episode, we talked about this some, when it comes to learning spaces through necessity versus kind of being led by the nose. And it just, every time I play Witcher now, it just kind of hits me like a ton of bricks as far as how much, how games lead you by the nose these days. And kind of after playing this and finishing this game, kind of wishing that we would ease off of that as an industry, and kind of let the player really learn. Again, the example I gave last time was Novigrad as a city. It's actually a pretty cool city, and it's actually very well realized. And there are districts, and there are logic. There's logic to it, but I don't learn any of it because I'm just following the HUD.
And just, hey, where am I supposed to go next?
Yeah, and I really learned
counterpoint to that for you. So
I really learned the decks in this game, like each of the ship's decks, because it was frustrating because I got lost a lot, right? So that's why I had to learn them. But even when we were in the body of the many, I kind of got to know that space, and there wasn't a map. So I'm really mixed on that, but I miss it. And the other game I'm playing is I forgot to mention last time was StarCraft II: Legacy of the Void. So sci-fi, high science fiction, crazy story, well polished RTS.
Yeah, woman who's sort of an artificial intelligence. Oh no, she's Zerg, I guess.
She's Zerg, yeah.
So it's been a long time since I played and listened.
Well,
to
she's
got the same hairdo.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of Shodan, I think, in the Queen of Blades. So Kerrigan. So, yeah, but
absolutely.
Just really well polished. It's Blizzard stuff, and I love the StarCraft universe. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about you?
I finished Prune, which I mentioned last time.
Oh, yeah.
Good. Yeah, a great short iOS game. It's probably also on Android. Really recommend it. Just very chill.
So it has
very
an end.
Relaxed. It does have an end. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It has just a certain number of levels. There's probably I want to say 50 levels total. And they introduce a new mechanic each kind of set of levels. There's maybe 4 sets, and it's just nice. It's just really relaxed, and you don't feel a lot of pressure. And hey, you know what? Your tree didn't work out. Just grow another tree. It's very nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then since we've gotten into March and weather's started to warm up, I've starting to feel nostalgia for the snow. I hate snow. I don't like being cold, so I never go out in it. But I do really like playing A Good Snowman is Hard to Build, which is another, for me, iOS game. I think there may be a PC build. It's a simple puzzler. It uses the rules of snowman building, which are, you put a big ball of snow and then a medium ball of snow and then a small ball of snow, right, on top of each other. And as you move them around in the snow, it picks up the snow. It just makes lots of puzzles out of those very simple sort of rules of building a snowman. It's a delightful little game. It maybe took me an hour and a half to play, but it was delightful and calming. A couple of the puzzles were a little fiendish, and you sort of have to rethink, and it doesn't do a lot of here's a rule, it doesn't teach you. You just kind of know how snowmen work. Really, really nice. Quite liked it. There's some really clever little puzzles. I especially like really economical puzzles that take place in a minimal amount of space, where it's you have to figure out there's one solution and you've got to think about how am I going to be able to what are the constraints on moving these things around because of the limited space. I love that sort of puzzling, and this is really, really good tight puzzle design. But the big game I'm playing, and it's inspired by playing System Shock 2 because I needed more difficulty in my life. I've just kicked off a play of Dark Souls on the PS3.
Oh no!
Yeah. when you talk about learning a space, I'm only a few hours in, maybe. I got through the initial sort of prison breakout that you do, and now I'm in Undead Town or Undead Burg or something like that, and it's really, really funny how much you learn the space because you retread it again and again and again, gathering up souls and leveling up and learning how enemies work. And it is a big, beautiful bear of a game. So I am totally diving into the difficulty once again.
Wow.
Having played System Shock 2, there's a lot less systemically going on with a game like Dark Souls. Its difficulty is more in sort of learning individual tells and how enemies work more than and a space. So you're kind of learning the map. There's some light systems. It's not super heavy on systems. There's a million numbers, but it more boils down to, do you want to power up your health points or your magic
Stats.
or whatever? Yeah, it's basically statistical. And all that feeds into weapon damage and resistance and all this stuff. It's not like I'm going to hack a door, in Anne Orlando when I get to it. So there's kind of, a limited vocabulary of stuff you got to worry about. But you do have the similar thing of I don't have a map. I talked to a guy, he says, go up that hill. There's a, bad guy at the top with a bell and a bad guy at the bottom with a bell. And if you're going to ring them both, that'll be good. And I'm like, okay. I did love Demon's Souls. That was a game that just took over my life for a week or two when I played that. So I've been holding on to Dark Souls for a while, and System Shock 2 actually pushed me over the edge where it's you know what? I need more of that old school difficulty in my life. So,
nice.
With that said, why don't you tell us a little bit about this special guest we've got lined up for episode 5, special episode 5 beta.
Yeah, we're extending our series because we were able to get a guest, as we talked about. I think in the first episode, one of our goals for every series will hopefully be to find somebody who worked on the game that we're playing to get some insight and do some interviewee kind of stuff. Keep it light and casual, but it would be great to get some perspective because we're doing a lot of guessing. And so we have luckily been able to get Ken Levine to agree to come on and talk about his experiences with System Shock 2. As Brett mentioned when we started off, this is Irrational Games' their first game. So seems pretty cool of him to come on. And
that is a man whose brain I cannot wait to pick.
Yeah. I was really happy that he bit. And so he seems pretty into it and gung ho. And we're gonna record him next week, and that'll be our 5th episode.
Yeah, it's a great way to round out the episode because we can sort of talk about. I mean, I mostly want to talk about the strengths of the game. I'm particularly interested in like how they balance this thing, and also how they thought about the space, like how did they split it up, and the story beats that they had. I just like this is a big, huge ball of wax on those areas because it's so interconnected. There's the story bits and making those parse, and of course they had some history they were drawing on. All of that stuff is super fascinating to me. I'm less, I mean, at this kind of distance, I'm less interested in sort of technical concerns about these games. I'm really interested in, I guess you'd call them production questions, but they're sort of like just managing this thing
Yeah.
and bringing it home in 18 months, which, we don't do anymore. I don't know
Not
the
at
last
all.
time I worked on a game that was 18 months.
Yeah.
It was probably Jedi Starfighter. So it has been a while. So yeah, it's going to be great to talk to Ken.
Very
I know
exciting.
he's been kind of doing his own thing. I wonder if we can pick his brain a little bit about that, because I know, IG kind of got a reboot a couple of years ago. I know he's really interested in narrative fitting together these days, and I wonder if his experiences on games like these have kind of informed that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd like to ask him about that too. So I could talk to that guy for hours and not run out of questions. He's a veteran and somebody, I think a lot of us really look up to for games like this, and certainly games like Bioshock.
Yeah, there's good reason to.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, started his own studio, did a lot of interesting games, some, work for hire, sequels and things like that. I mean, this turned out to be, but I don't think it started out that way. And it must have been just a really, really wild time to be. I mean, we were just starting in games when they were making this, so we kind of have a parallel that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
very
really
exciting.
great.
Yeah, so look forward to that.
Yeah, that'll be great. I hope we get an hour, or or maybe a little more out of Ken next week. And then we've decided not to hold a vote for the first game in sort of the podcast starting proper. This, as we've been saying all along, has been kind of a beta, allow us to sort of feel each other out, get comfortable with the format, get comfortable with the tools for publishing podcasts instead of a website and Twitter and blah, blah, blah. So, Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about the game we're going to play? Because I've never played it. In fact, I've never played a game from the series it's in. And so it's going to be totally new territory for me.
Yeah, so we've it's obviously a hot topic right now because Hitman has kind of had a new, not necessarily reboot, but a new version has come out that's just they're started their beta and they're doing kind of an episodic thing, and so the new one's just called Hitman, and so we're going to play Hitman 2, which sort of was IO Games, IO Interactive's first kind of. Obviously, there was a Hitman 1. Hitman 2 was really their breakout game, where I think people started to really, recognize them, and the special recipe that I'm a big Hitman fan of big fan of the series, and they have a recipe with that game. As crazy as it is to describe it this way, an old colleague of mine from Crystal Dynamics, Noah Hughes, used to call Hitman a murder simulator. And it basically is. I mean, it's a puzzle game, but it's about killing people. But the way that the level design and the systemic design really merges together in that series is really unique, and I think a lot of games have kind of looked to it in a very sandboxy way. So I'm excited for Brett to play it. And 2 is definitely one of the older games from IO, and even though it's the second one, it goes way back.
Probably 13 years old, something like that. It's pretty far back. It's at least a decade that we're looking at this point. Yeah.
So we thought we'd mix it up, do something pretty different from System Shock 2, and
I for one am glad that somebody has finally tackled murder in a video game.
Right.
I mean, you never see that. And
no, there's no simulation.
Really
not many simulations of that in our industry.
It really never happened. So it's good to see somebody really tackling them head on. So that'll do it for us, but that'll give people a chance. They'll get a couple weeks to get ramped up. I guess we'll announce on Twitter at Dev Game Club where we'll be playing to for that first episode. We probably won't play a ton of it for the first one, but then we'll be, digging in deeper. I don't know how long of a game it is. Like I said, I've never played that one. So Tim's going to be guiding that a little bit more and giving me the assignments this time out. But yeah, look for that at Dev Game Club. I'm sure we'll be retweeting
we can
from our own accounts. Yep.
We can mention it at the end of next episode, maybe too. I'll do some research on that.
That's true. That's true. That's a good idea. So reach out to us at devgameclub@gmail.com. That's all one word, devgameclub, which is also our Twitter handle. You can find us at devgameclub.com, which is where you can listen to this podcast, or on podcaster of your choice. I'm at Brett_Duville on Twitter, and Tim is
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Tim, and I'm really looking forward to picking Ken's brain next week.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brett.
All right. Good night.
Good night.